The transatlantic slave trade began during the 15th century when Portugal and subsequently other European kingdoms were finally able to expand overseas and reach Africa. The Portuguese were the first to move Africans enslaved back to Europe. It is estimated that by the early 16th century, as much as 10% of Portugal's population was of African descent. After the European discovery of the American continent, the demand for African labor gradually grew.
The transatlantic slave trade in America. Before we begin this powerful story, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, your city and your country? And if you are new here, please subscribe to American Global Force, like and share this video, so together we can spread this story across a wider audience and challenge the false history many people were told. Tonight, we travel back into one of the darkest and most mysterious roads in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. The night air in Niani carried whispers through the tall grass, and young Fadika could not sleep. The moon sat high over the Mandinki village, like a silent watcher, and every sound felt louder than before. The drums had stopped hours ago, the fires were low, and the elders had gone inside their huts. Yet something in the wind felt wrong. Fadika was 17 seasons old, strong, quick, and known for climbing the tallest baobab trees without fear. His father, Jato, was a respected hunter, and his mother, Sira, was a keeper of old stories of kings, traders, and strange white men who had begun to appear along the coast. Fadika had heard those stories many times, but to him they felt distant, like shadows that could never touch his home. That night, however, he felt those shadows moving closer. Earlier that day, a traveler from the west had arrived with troubling news. Villages near the river had gone silent. Families had vanished. Fires had been seen in the distance. The traveler spoke of men with weapons, men who worked for foreign traders, taking people away. The elders listened but said little. Some believed it was war between rival clans. Others feared something far worse. Fadika remembered the look on Elder Bamba's face, the oldest man in the village, when the traveler finished speaking. It was not fear, but recognition, as though he had heard this story before. As the moon moved higher, Fadika stepped outside his hut and looked toward the forest. The trees stood still, yet he heard a sound, soft at first, then clearer, footsteps. He froze. From the darkness came his friend Adwoba, a young Akan girl whose family had lived among the Mandinki traders for years. Her eyes were wide. She whispered that she had seen men near the river, strangers with ropes and fire sticks. Fadika felt his heart pound. He wanted to wake the village, but Adwoba grabbed his arm and said they must first tell Elder Bamba. The two moved quietly through the village, their feet brushing the dry earth, their breath heavy with fear. But before they reached the elder's hut, the dogs began barking. Then came the screams. Fire exploded into the night. Men rushed into the village, some speaking strange tongues, others speaking words Fadika understood. They were African raiders, but behind them were pale-skinned men with hard faces and shining guns. Fadika watched as huts burned and villagers ran in every direction. His father fought with a spear, bringing down one attacker before a gunshot tore through the air. Fadika saw him fall. Sira screamed, but two men seized her. Fadika wanted to run to her, but Adwoba pulled him away. They hid behind a broken wall, trembling as ropes tightened around the wrists of their people. Fadika saw children crying, elders beaten, strong men dragged like animals. The pale men said little, only pointed, counted, and watched. One of them wore a gold chain and carried a small book. He rode as though the suffering before him was nothing more than numbers.
Fadika felt rage burn inside him, but Adwoba whispered that if they moved, they would die too. Hours passed. By dawn, the village was gone. Smoke rose into the morning sky, and the survivors were tied together in long lines. Fadika and Adwoba had escaped, but everything they knew was lost.
They watched from the trees as the captives were marched westward. Fadika saw his mother among them. Their eyes met for only a moment before she disappeared into the moving line. He wanted to run after her, but Elder Bamba appeared from the forest, wounded but alive. He stopped Fadika and spoke words that changed everything. He said this was not war. This was trade, human trade, a road of no return. He said for many years, people had been taken to the coast, sold to foreign ships, and carried across a great water to lands no one returned from. Fadika could not believe it. How could people sell people? Elder Bamba told him greed had no tribe, and fear had no borders. Some kings traded enemies. Some traders sold neighbors. Some lied for gold. Fadika looked west and swore he would follow that road, no matter how far it went. He would find his mother, or die trying. Adwoba refused to let him go alone. She said her own brother had vanished months before, and now she believed he had been taken the same way. Together, with Elder Bamba's blessing, they began their journey toward the coast, following the footprints of the chained, but none of them knew that the road ahead held secrets deeper than the ocean itself, and that the greatest danger was not only the white men on the ships, but the hidden betrayal waiting among their own people. The sun rose hard over the red earth as Fadika and Adwoba followed the broken trail westward, their feet heavy with dust and their hearts heavier with fear. The smoke of their ruined village still lingered behind them like a ghost, but before them stretched a road filled with signs of suffering. Broken ropes, footprints pressed deep into the soil, and scraps of cloth torn from those who had been dragged away. Elder Bamba had warned them that the road to the coast was not simply a path. It was a chain of sorrow that had been growing for many generations. Men, women, and children had walked it, and very few had ever been seen again. As they moved through the thick forest and dry plains, Fadika began to see things he had never imagined. Villages stood empty, their cooking fires cold, their wells abandoned. In one village, they found an old woman named Nyari, her back bent like a tree in storm, sitting alone beside the ruins of her home. She said the raiders had come 3 nights before, taking everyone strong enough to walk. Her sons, her daughters, even her grandchildren. She was left because she could no longer stand without help. Her eyes were empty, but her voice was sharp when she spoke of the coast. She said the traders there had built stone forts beside the sea, and those forts swallowed people whole. Fadika asked who controlled them, and Nyari said many hands. White men from across the waters, African kings seeking gold, and middlemen who grew rich selling flesh. That truth struck Fadika harder than any weapon. He had believed the enemy was only foreign, but now he saw that betrayal lived close to home.
They gave Nyari water and continued. By the 3rd day, they reached a narrow crossing near the Volta River, where they found another trail of captives. This line was fresh. The ground was wet with tears and footprints. Hiding in the trees, Fadika and Adwoba watched as chained people were driven forward by armed guards.
Among them was a tall Akan man named Kwabena, his shoulders marked with rope burns, his face hard but calm. Fadika noticed something strange. Kwabena was not broken. His eyes moved like a hunter's, studying every guard, every tree, every turn in the path. When the line stopped to drink, Kwabena looked toward the forest and saw Fadika hiding. For a moment, their eyes met. He gave no sign, but Fadika understood. This man was waiting. That night, as the guards slept, Kwabena made his move. With a stone hidden beneath his feet, he cut through the rope binding his hands and attacked the nearest guard. The forest exploded in chaos. Some captives ran, others were caught. Fadika and Adwoba rushed in to help. They struck a guard with branches and freed 2 children, but the escape failed. More guards came. In the struggle, Kwabena was captured again, beaten but alive. Before they dragged him away, he shouted one thing to Fadika: Cape Coast. The words burned into Fadika's mind.
It was a place on the sea, a place where the ships waited. Now they had a direction. Days later, hunger drove them into a market town called Salaga. It was crowded with traders from many lands: salt, gold, cola nuts, cloth, and people. Fadika could hardly breathe when he saw it. In the center of the market stood a group of chained captives, being examined like goats. Their teeth were checked, their arms pulled, their backs touched. Men argued over their value. A woman cried as her son was taken from her side. Adwoba covered her mouth, shaking. This was no hidden evil. It was open, plain, and accepted. Fadika wanted to scream, but Elder Bamba's words returned. Rage without wisdom is a trap. So he watched. He listened. There he heard of a man named Kande, a Mandinki trader who worked both sides of the trade. He sold goods to villages, but sold villagers to the coast. Worse, people whispered that Kande had been seen near Niani the night it burned. Fadika felt the ground shift beneath him. Could one of his own people have led the raiders? That night, they tracked Kande to an inn. Through the cracked wall, they heard him speaking to a pale-skinned trader. The foreign man spoke of ships arriving soon. Ships bound for lands called Jamaica, Virginia, and Bahia. He said strong captives brought the highest price. Kande laughed and promised more. Fadika could not hold himself back. He rushed inside with Adwoba behind him, but Kande was ready. He smiled when he saw Fadika, as though expecting him. Then he spoke a terrible truth. Fadika's father, Jato, had not died in the raid. He had been taken alive. Fadika froze. Kande said Jato was on his way to Cape Coast, along with Sira. Fadika's hands shook. He wanted to kill Kande, but guards rushed in. Fadika and Adwoba escaped through the rear, chased into the darkness. They ran until dawn. When they finally stopped, Adwoba asked if Kande had been lying. Fadika did not know. But now, hope and fear had become one. His parents might still live. Yet every step toward Cape Coast brought them closer to the ships. And if the stories were true, once those ships sailed, the ocean itself would become their prison. Far ahead, beyond the forests and rivers, the stone walls of Cape Coast waited. And inside those walls, secrets older than memory were already preparing to change Fadika's life forever. For 12 more days, Fadika and Adwoba moved toward the coast, crossing dry plains,
thick forests, and villages where silence had become more common than song. The deeper they traveled, the more the truth of the trade revealed itself. It was like a giant net spread across the land, catching people from every tribe: Mandinki, Akan, Yue, Fante, Yoruba, and many others, pulling them all toward one place. Fadika began to understand that this was no small thing. It was a machine of greed, turning human lives into wealth. Along the road, they met survivors, broken families, and escaped captives who spoke of stone castles near the sea. Castles where people were packed into dark rooms before being sold. One old man named Tano told them the sea itself looked endless, and the ships upon it looked like floating monsters with wings of cloth. He said once people entered those ships, they vanished from Africa forever. That night, Fadika could not sleep. He kept seeing his mother's eyes in the smoke and hearing Kande's words. His father alive, his mother alive. But for how long? By the 13th morning, they smelled the ocean before they saw it. It was a strange smell, sharp and endless. Then, as they climbed a hill,
The sea opened before them like another world, stretching beyond sight. But what caught Fadika's breath was not the water. It was the castle. Cape Coast stood on the edge of the sea, like a beast made of stone. Its white walls bright under the sun, yet carrying darkness inside. Around it moved armed men, traders, and chained captives.
Canoes carried goods from shore to ships, waiting in the deep water. Fadika counted 3 great ships, their wooden bodies larger than any building he had ever seen. The sails rested like sleeping birds. Adwoba whispered that it looked peaceful from far away. But Fadika knew peace did not live there. They hid among fishermen's huts, watching the castle for hours. Through careful listening, they learned captives were kept below the castle in underground rooms, called dungeons, until enough had been gathered for the next ship. One ship would leave in 2 days. Panic gripped Fadika. If his parents were there, time was almost gone. That evening, they met a fisherman named Ekau, a Fante man with deep scars across his arms. He seemed kind, but careful. At first, he refused to help, saying the castle was death for anyone who entered without permission. But when Adwoba told him about her missing brother and Fadika's stolen family, his face changed.
He revealed something shocking. He too had once been a captive in the castle, but escaped during a storm years before. He knew the secret paths beneath it. Fadika begged for his help. Echo agreed, but warned them. The castle held more than chains. It held men who had forgotten mercy. That night, beneath heavy clouds,
Echo led them through hidden rocks near the shore, where seawater entered small tunnels beneath the castle. They crawled through wet darkness, rats running over their hands, until they reached a broken wall inside the lower chambers. The smell hit them first. Sweat, fear, waste, and sorrow so thick it felt alive. Fadika nearly choked. Through iron bars, he saw the captives. Hundreds of them, packed together, weak, hungry, their eyes hollow. Some sang softly, old songs of home. Others sat silent, already lost in spirit. Fadika searched the faces desperately. Then he saw her. Sirah, his mother. Thin, tired, but alive. She stared at him as though seeing a ghost. Tears filled her eyes. Fadika rushed to the bars, grabbing her hands. She whispered his name. But where was Jato? Sirah's face darkened. She told him Jato had tried to fight during the march and had been separated. She believed he was in another chamber. Before Fadika could ask more, footsteps came. Echo pulled him back into the shadows. 2 guards passed, speaking of tomorrow's loading. Tomorrow, not 2 days. The ship had moved early. Fear spread like fire through Fadika's chest. They had less than 1 night. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, searching for Jado, they heard another voice. It was Kande. The trader stood with the pale-skinned captain, counting prisoners and discussing prices. Fadika listened as Kande revealed something even worse. The next raid would target 3 more inland villages, including Elder Bomba's refuge. The trade was far from ending. It was growing. Fadika's anger nearly burst. But then he heard another name, Kwabena, the Akan prisoner who had tried to escape. He was alive, locked with the strongest men, waiting to be shipped. Fadika now understood. If they could free Kwabena and the others, they could create enough chaos to rescue his parents. But it would mean opening every dungeon and facing soldiers, traitors, and the captain himself. Echo warned that once the bells rang, the whole castle would wake. It was madness, yet there was no other way. Fadika looked at Adwoba. She nodded. There was no fear in her eyes now, only fire. For the first time since Nyani burned, Fadika felt the shape of a plan. Before dawn, they would strike. But hidden in the upper rooms of the castle, a secret waited that none of them expected. A ledger, filled with names, tribes, and destinations. Proof that the slave trade was larger than any of them had imagined. And inside that book was a name that would change Fadika's understanding of his own blood forever. The night grew heavier over Cape Coast, and the sea crashed against the rocks like drums of warning. Inside the hidden tunnel beneath the castle, Fadika sat in silence, his heart racing as he thought of the plan. Around him, Adwoba and Echo whispered over the paths through the dungeon, marking where guards walked and where keys were kept. Above them, the castle slept, but below, sorrow remained awake. The captives coughed, prayed, and waited for a sunrise many feared would be their last on African soil. Fadika could still feel his mother's hands in his own, weak but warm, proof that hope had not died. Yet the words he had overheard from Kande kept turning in his mind. A ledger, names, destinations, and something about his own blood. He needed to know the truth. Before the rescue began, Ekau led them through another narrow passage into an upper storage room. It was packed with barrels of rum, cloth, iron chains, and boxes of muskets. In the corner sat a wooden table covered in papers. Fadika found the ledger there, thick and worn, its pages filled with names, tribes, ages, and places. At first, it looked like nothing but cruel counting, but then his eyes froze on a name he knew. Jado. Beside it was written sold by Kande. Fadika's hands trembled. He kept reading, and then saw another line, one he could hardly believe. Kande of Nyani, brother of Jado. The room seemed to spin. Kande was his uncle. The man helping sell their people was blood. Fadika felt something break inside him. All this time, he had thought Kande was simply a traitor from his people. But now, he saw the truth. His father's own brother had betrayed them. Adwoba read over his shoulder and covered her mouth in shock. Echo whispered that greed had poisoned many families. Fadika wanted to tear the book apart, but Adwoba stopped him. This book was proof. Proof of the trade, proof of the lies, proof that even blood could turn to chains. Before they could leave, footsteps sounded outside. They hid as Kande entered with the pale captain, a man called Harrington. The two spoke quietly, but Fadika heard enough.
Harrington said the strongest men, including Jado and Kwabena, would be loaded first at dawn, women and children after.
Conde laughed and said the market in the islands would pay double. Then Harrington asked about the inland villages. Conde named Elder Bamba's hiding place. Fadika's rage sharpened into something cold. He understood now. Conde had not only betrayed his family, he meant to destroy every last place of resistance. When the men left, Fadika swore Conde would not leave that castle alive. Before dawn, the plan began. Ekao stole the keys from a sleeping guard. Adwoba moved through the women's chamber, whispering courage into tired ears. Fadika reached the room where the strongest men were held. There, in the darkness, he found Jado. His father was thinner, bruised but standing tall. For a moment, neither moved. Then Jado gripped his son's shoulders, his eyes full of pride and pain. Fadika almost broke, but there was no time. Beside Jado stood Kwabena, still unbroken, his eyes burning with the same fire as before. Fadika unlocked the chains and told them the plan. When the bells for loading rang, they would turn the castle into chaos. The gates would open, the prisoners would run, and those who could fight would fight. Dawn came with a trumpet blast. Guards moved into the dungeons, unlocking chains and driving captives toward the courtyard. That was the moment. Kwabena struck first, breaking a guard's neck with his bare hands. Jado grabbed another's musket. Fadika shouted, and the chambers exploded into movement. Chains became weapons. Stones flew. Cries shook the walls. Women rushed from their cells. Men fought like storms. The guards had not expected resistance from the weak, but they were wrong. Years of fear turned into fury. Fadika found Sira and pulled her into the crowd. Adwoba freed children and led them toward the tunnel, but the castle awoke fast. Bells rang wildly. Soldiers poured into the courtyard. Gunshots thundered. Smoke filled the air. Harrington screamed orders. Then Conde appeared, sword in hand, his face pale when he saw Fadika alive. He shouted that Fadika should stop, saying he had done all this for wealth, for power, for survival. Fadika stared at him, unable to understand how a man could sell his own blood. Conde said the world was changing, and only the strong would survive. Fadika answered that strength without honor was emptiness. Their fight began in the middle of the burning courtyard, uncle against nephew, while all around them, the castle fell into madness. But above the chaos, something worse was coming. Harrington had ordered the ships to fire their cannons toward the shore to stop any escape, and if they fired, everyone below, captives and fighters alike, would be destroyed. The roar of the sea mixed with the screams inside Cape Coast as fire spread across the wooden beams of the castle. Smoke climbed into the morning sky, and the smell of burning oil filled the air. Fadika could hear the ships outside shifting into position, their heavy cannons turning toward the shore. Every heartbeat now carried the weight of life or death. In the middle of the courtyard, his blade clashed against Conde's sword, uncle against nephew, blood against blood. Around them, freed captives fought desperately, using broken chains, stones, and stolen muskets against the guards. Kwabena stood like a storm in the center of it all, driving back soldiers with fierce strength, while Jado protected Sira and the children near the tunnel entrance. Adwoba moved fast through the smoke, helping the weak escape into the hidden passage. But time was slipping away. Conde fought with the confidence of a man who had long abandoned shame. He laughed as he struck at Fadika.
saying the world belonged to men willing to take what others feared to touch. He said gold was stronger than family, stronger than tribe, stronger than truth. Fadika answered with silence, his anger now steady, his mind clear. He no longer fought as a frightened son. He fought as the voice of everyone Khanda had sold. Their blades scraped and flashed, sparks jumping between them. Then Khanda made a mistake. He looked away for a moment as the first cannon from the ship thundered. The blast struck the outer wall of the castle, shaking the ground and breaking stone into the courtyard. In that moment, Fadika struck. Khandi dropped to his knees, staring at his nephew with wide eyes. For the first time, there was no pride left in him, only fear. He whispered that more ships would always come, more traitors, more chains. Then he fell. Fadika stood over him, not with joy, but with sorrow. One evil had fallen, but the machine of the trade still lived. Across the yard, Captain Harrington barked orders for a second cannon fire. Fadika realized if the ships kept firing, the escape would fail. He shouted to Kwabena and Jado. There was only one chance. They had to reach the shore and stop the cannons. Through smoke and chaos, Fadika, Jado, Kwabena, and a handful of freed men charged toward the beach. Guards chased them, but the captives behind them fought back, buying precious moments. Adwoba stayed behind with Sirah, leading the women and children through the tunnel. The beach was madness. Canoes were being loaded, sailors shouting, muskets firing. Fadika ran straight into the surf, climbing into one of the smaller boats tied near the shore. Jado followed. Kwabena grabbed an oar and pushed them toward the nearest ship. Bullets struck the water around them, but they kept moving. The great ship rose above them like a mountain of wood and iron. Fadika climbed first, using the ropes hanging from its side. On the deck, sailors rushed him, but he fought with a speed born from desperation. Jado and Kwabena joined him. Together, they battled through the crew, cutting ropes, overturning powder barrels, and forcing their way toward the cannons. Captain Harrington himself stood waiting, pistol in hand. He fired. The shot struck Jado in the shoulder, throwing him down. Fadika screamed and rushed forward. Harrington drew his sword, and the two fought across the deck while fire began to spread from a broken powder barrel. Harrington mocked him, saying thousands had crossed this ocean and millions more would. He said no one could stop it. Fadika answered that even the strongest river begins with one drop. Their blades crashed again and again until Harrington slipped on the burning wood. Fadika struck, and the captain fell into the flames. The ship was now lost. Kwabena shouted that the fire had reached the powder. They leaped into the sea just as the ship exploded, sending wood and smoke high into the sky. The blast shook the other ships, forcing them to pull away. On shore, the remaining guards fled, thinking war had come. By sunset, Cape Coast was broken. Many captives escaped into the forests. Some had fallen, but many had lived. Fadika found Adwoba, Sira, and the children safe beyond the rocks. Jado survived, wounded but breathing. For a brief moment, it felt like victory. But as night came, Elder Bamba's warning returned. This was only one castle, one ship, one battle. The trade stretched far beyond this shore, and among the rescued captives, Fadika found something unexpected. A small boy, weak and silent, wearing a carved symbol around his neck. Sira gasped when she saw it. It was the mark of Fadika's young brother, Baro, who had vanished many seasons before. But this boy was not Baro. He carried a message, a whisper from across the ocean. A whisper that,
Baro was still alive, somewhere in the lands beyond the sea. The night after the battle at Cape Coast felt strange, almost unreal. The fire in the broken castle still glowed against the dark sky, and the sea moved as if nothing had happened, as if it had not carried away countless souls over countless years. Around the hidden forest camp, the rescued captives rested, weak but alive. Some cried quietly. Some sang songs of thanksgiving. Some stared into the darkness, unable to understand how they had escaped the place they believed would be their end. Fadika sat beside his father, Jato, whose wounded shoulder had been wrapped by Adwoba with strips of cloth. Sira rested near them, her eyes full of tears and strength. For the first time since Niani burned, they were together again. Yet peace did not settle in Fadika's heart. His mind was fixed on the small boy and the message he carried. The carved symbol around the boy's neck was one only his family knew, a mark his younger brother Baro had worn since childhood. The boy, whose name was Mensa, spoke weakly but clearly. He said Baro had been taken many rains before and sent across the great water to a land called Jamaica. There, on a sugar plantation, Baro had survived. Before Mensa escaped on a trader's ship returning to Africa, Baro had given him the symbol and one message: "Tell my family I still breathe." Those words struck Fadika like thunder. For years they believed Baro was dead. Now he lived, but in chains on the other side of the world. Jato stared at the fire for a long time before speaking.
He said the ocean had stolen too much from them, but perhaps it had not stolen everything. Elder Bamba arrived at dawn with warriors from the inland refuge. Word of the uprising had spread quickly. Many villages were rising, some destroying trade routes, some attacking raiders. The old man looked proud, but his eyes were heavy.
He told them the truth. The trade would not end because one castle had fallen. For more than 300 years, millions had been taken. The wealth of distant lands had been built on stolen hands, stolen backs, and stolen names. Gold, tobacco, cotton, sugar, all had been fed by African blood. He explained how kingdoms in Europe grew powerful, how ports in England, Portugal, Spain, and the Americas grew rich, while Africa lost generations of strength. Families were split forever. Languages were scattered. Traditions were carried across oceans and mixed into new worlds. But Elder Bamba also said something important. The people who were taken did not disappear. They survived. They resisted. They carried Africa within them. In Jamaica, in Brazil, in Virginia, in Haiti, the spirit of Africa lived on. That truth changed Fadika. He understood now that the story of the transatlantic slave trade was not only about loss. It was also about survival, about memory, about resistance. For many days, the survivors buried their dead, cared for the wounded, and prepared to move inland where they would be safer. But Fadika could not rest. The message from Baro burned inside him. Across the sea, his brother lived. The same ocean that had taken him now called Fadika forward. Adwoba saw the storm in his eyes and asked what he planned. Fadika said he could not stop here. If one brother still lived in chains, then many more did too. Jato wanted to forbid him, but Sira stopped him. She said the blood of their family had always followed truth, no matter how far it led. Kwabena stepped forward and said he would go too. His own people had been scattered,
and perhaps some were across the sea as well. Even Adwoba refused to stay behind. Together, They would take the fight beyond Africa itself. With help from Echo and the fishermen, they repaired one of the smaller ships left behind after the battle. It was dangerous, almost foolish, but the sea no longer looked impossible. It looked like a road. Before they left, Elder Bamba handed Fadika the ledger from the castle. He said this book must survive. It held names, proof, and truth. One day, the world would need to remember. Fadika took it and swore that no matter what happened, the names inside would not be forgotten. At sunrise, the small ship pushed into the water.
The survivors stood on the shore, watching. Jado raised his hand. Sira whispered blessings. The wind caught the sail, and the shore began to fade. Ahead lay storms, slave islands, plantations, and dangers beyond anything Fadika had known. But also answers. And maybe borrow. As the sun rose over the endless ocean, Fadika looked at the horizon and understood something greater than himself. The transatlantic slave trade had tried to turn human beings into cargo, but it could never kill the hunger for freedom. Chains could cross oceans, but so could courage. And somewhere beyond the waters, in lands shaped by pain and survival, new stories were being born. Stories of revolt, freedom, and return. The road of no return had become, for Fadika, the road of reckoning. America. Global Force is where hidden history speaks and forgotten truths rise again. If you made it to the end of this story, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city and your country. And if you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe to America Global Force, like this video, and share it so more people can hear the truth and keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay strong, stay curious, and never forget the past, because history still walks among us.